There are so many things that can lead to a burnout. You've already made that huge step by simply starting towards your goals, but how do you keep that consistency from petering out? How do you keep those new but fragile habits from eventually withering away? Einstein said something about how crazy it would be to do the same thing over and over again while expecting different results. But the reality is that we do need to exercise some level of crazy if we want to progress at certain skills. Because the road is filled with apparent stagnation and even regression, one of the most common reasons for burnout is how difficult it can be to measure our progress in certain skills. It's almost like the more challenging the skill is, the more difficult it is to measure. And those are the very skills that are most fulfilling and rewarding to learn. It's also the nature of most skills that progress is never linear. It often makes a lot of fluctuations as we trend upwards over the long run, but most people don't stick around through all of these fluctuations to realize any significant level of improvement. We start to ask ourselves whether it wouldn't be wiser to spend that time doing something else. These are frustrations that I've dealt with for a long time while trying to learn one skill or the other. In fact, this is what I think separates the top performers from the amateurs and novices in any domain is their ability to keep doing something even without noticing any difference. There are three ways we can mollify these frustrations and reduce the likeliness of prematurely quitting something that we were actually improving on. One of the most effective ways to do this is by immersion. Immersing ourselves simply means creating an environment that includes the people, the objects, or even digital items that inspires us and motivates us to do whatever activity it is that we want to do. Not only does it motivate us, but it also makes it that much easier to actually perform whatever task or routine that we want to establish. The great thing about immersion is that we're taking away many of the small steps that it usually takes us to perform whatever activity we want to perform. We're consolidating that into one big decision. If it's something online that we want to engage in a little bit more, we can create a screensaver that reminds us, or we can follow a bunch of accounts online that always inspires us to start doing something. Or if it's a language we want to learn, we can do that by moving countries where it's almost inevitable that we're going to learn. When done right, we start to notice that the amount of effort we have to put in to finally engage in whatever it is that we want to do is that much less. So essentially, we're making a big decision, and that's the hardest part. But the time and effort required to immerse ourselves pays off with interest in the amount of time and effort we save in the long run from not having to burden ourselves with all of those little decisions that could be the difference between quitting or staying consistent. By immersing ourselves, the speed of learning is significantly improved, the effort to engage in that learning is significantly reduced, and most importantly, the fatigue that comes from not noticing any progress is significantly diminished, if for no other reason than progress becomes very quick and noticeable. Immersion is taking that time and effort to commit ourselves to a lifestyle that fosters our growth in whatever activity that we want to progress at. A second way to reduce progress fatigue is simply by watching others at a level of performance that we aspire to be. I like to call this benchmarking. I used to get frustrated in the past whenever someone asked me, "How long did it take you to learn that skill?" But then I started to realize just how important this question is. It gives the person asking an idea of what they might expect in terms of how long it might take them on average. The best way to do that is not by simply asking one person, but to sample as many people as possible of those you aspire to be and ask yourself how much time and how much effort did it take for them to get to that level that they're at. I think it's advisable to not get too wedded to that average because anybody could fall on the lower end or the higher end of that average, but just take it as a ballpark to put in perspective how much time and effort you might need to put in before you can finally notice some progress. And lastly, if all else fails, and as cliche as it might sound, we simply need to trust the process. This might just come down to focusing on skills that we have an inherent interest in, or at least skills that complement whatever longer term goals that we have. That way, when the frustration and boredom starts to set in, we can always recall the goals and the reasons we started to do it in the first place and rekindle our drive to continue. There are so many skills that we all want to learn, but at the end of the day, we need to prioritize which ones are most important to us. More often than not, what is most important to us also happens to be what we're most interested in. By focusing on those, we're increasing the threshold by which we might get bored or frustrated at an apparent lack of progress. To recap, the 3 ways that we can reduce the frustration that comes from learning any skill that is difficult but rewarding is first to intentionally immerse ourselves in an environment that fosters our growth in that skill. Second, we can benchmark by looking at other people that we aspire to be like and asking ourselves how long and how much effort does it take to get there. And lastly, we need to trust the process, which we can make easier by finding things that we naturally gravitate to. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any thoughts about anything that I said, please feel free to leave it in the comments.